Hey, welcome to this tutorial where I walk through the steps I did to make these engines for my F-101 fighter project that I'm doing. So this is just the back end of the engine from the Afterburner on down. A lot of this tutorial is spent on the modeling aspects of it, the geometry, but there is a fair amount of time spent on the rigging of these various pieces. The nozzles are adjustable so that at the end of the project we'll have these controllers that allow you to move the nozzles independently if you want, and then you can of course keyframe these, and you have a timeline, and they'll open and close in your animation. If you're not interested in watching the whole modeling section, and honestly it's a big part of this tutorial time-wise, there is another video that I have where I just talk about the rigging and the bones. So if you want to save some time and that's what you're interested in, I would recommend watching that video instead. All right, let's start by creating the outer casing for the engine. Now I've already placed an empty where I want the center line of the engine to be, so I'm going to put my cursor there. Going to add a circle. We'll make it 24. RZ, rotate on 90 degrees, scale it down a bit, go into edit mode, select everything, EY, and I'm just going to bring that out to there. Now let's add some modifiers to this. We'll add a subdivision, because that's going to change the volume a little bit. So I want to make sure that I'm actually looking at how big it's really going to be. I'm just going to scale this down and looking at where it meets the fuselage here. So that's about right. And let's get these back to the center line. And we're going to move these to the end of the engine. Now there is a kind of a hard line here where it starts to curve down, so I'm going to add a line there, and I'm going to make that a bevel. So we're going to, with that edge selected, so if I double click on that edge, I've got that edge selected, I can increase the bevel weight to 1, and then I can add a bevel modifier, put that above the subdivision, make it pretty sharp. 2 and weight, and we want to make sure that we've applied rotation and scale, particularly with things like the bevel modifier and the solidify modifiers. If you're not scaled properly, these things don't work as you would expect them. So I'm going to hit Control A, apply rotation and scale, and that means our modifier should work properly. Go back into edit mode. I'm just going to scale this down. Oops, I don't want to be in median point. Scale this down. And you can see that the bottom of my engine here is a little low, and the top of my engine is a little, well, my engine's below that line, and it's below that line there. And that's because the engine doesn't quite lie straight inside the plane. So right now we're just working horizontally, and we'll adjust the angle of the engine in a minute. But that's why none of these lines are really lining up. So let's turn on our subdivision. All right. And let me bring in a picture here. I have a PureRef screen over here on my right that I'm looking at, but there's obviously only so much real estate here that I can record on. So let me bring in an image editor, and we'll bring in this picture so we have something to look at. And you can see there's a little flange here. I want to put that on here too before I go any further. So I'm going to get these guys. I'm going to move them straight along the y-axis. Then EY is going to bring it straight across, and double click on that line, make that a bevel. You see how that tightens it up nicely. So we've got a nice sharp line there, a nice sharp line there. In fact, you know what? This is probably not so much a sharp line as it is. So I don't think I want to bevel that line. I think maybe I'll just put 2 control loops here, just to keep it a little tighter, so that way the curve doesn't go all the way along here. It just kind of terminates between these 2 control lines. See how that looks. Everything's turned on. All right, so now I need to rotate the engine up a little bit. I've got my origin of the engine's right here at my center line, so if I rotate up, it's going to rotate right there. So you can see that this is too big here, so what I'll do is I'll take these two off for now and shrink this down and just rotate my engine a little bit more. So it's important to get the things squared up here now, because once we start putting in the exhaust pedals, the the variable, these nozzles here, things are going to get a lot more complicated, and you don't want to go then find out that you should have moved things around. So let me move my cursor to here, because I want to rotate. You can see how we're a little high here, so I'm going to rotate that down a little bit. So I'm kind of splitting the difference here. I'm just going to scale it up a bit. All right, let's put the airplane back in so we can test the fit there. I just want to make sure that it fits in with the rest of the model. So it looks like the front end needs to go in a little bit. I'm just hitting G and X to move it in, maybe G, Z a little bit to move it down. All right, and I want to make sure that we don't have anything protruding there. So I'm going to go to Active Element, and I'm going to choose a point that's inside the engine, so I can just scale the outside a little bit in. Maybe I hit SX, and just tuck it in a little bit. We're not going to see this, so I'm not concerned that it's not perfectly straight cylinder or a perfect cylinder. And let me I'm going to try to clean up this a little bit. So SZ, try to make it a little tighter there. Maybe just these guys, and then scaling from that point on the inside, I want to kind of push these out as X, without actually protruding through the aircraft skin. All right, so far so good. Just double check from the side, following our line pretty well. Let's just check, since we kind of extruded from a cylinder, let's just make sure that our normals are good, and they're not. So I'm going to select everything, Shift N. Now our normals are correct again, which will make a difference when we put the solidify modifier on it. So I want to add some thickness to this, not too much because it's fairly thin, so maybe 5 millimeters. I'd like to cover up that junk in there. And I can always thin this down manually, but I wanted the inside to be pretty clean. Now we're going to have some other stuff in here that's going to hide that ring, so I think we'll be okay there. So let's apply that. And then I just want to thin this up a bit here. So let's get out of active and just going to swell this up a little bit, because the end of the can is pretty skinny, and I just want to make sure these are beveled as well, so we get a nice tight edge there, and we don't need the faces in the front, so we can just get rid of these. All right, so shade smooth, turn on our bits. All right, so far so good. And let's add a mirror modifier as well. And we're going to, I have a empty in the center of my world. So I have an empty called F101 empty that's like literally on the origin right there. And any mirrored pieces are mirrored off of that empty. It makes it easy for me to always mirror stuff. So just checking these out first. All right, I think those look good. Let's start working on these adjustable fins next. They're probably the more complicated, probably the most complicated part of this engine. Now, unfortunately, I do not have a drawing of them, but I do have a reasonably good photograph. Let me bring it in. I'm just going to drag it in here from another screen. And you can see it's almost taken straight on. Not quite, because you get a little bit of an angle here, but it'll suit our purposes. So we can get some information from this that we then can use to figure out where various bits go inside the end of that, inside the end of the engine. So let me move the cursor here for a moment, and I'm going to add a circle, and I'm going to make it fairly big. This is just a tool we're going to use, so I don't care if it's got lots of vertices. I want it to be smooth, and I'm going to move it here. I'm going to scale it up and try to get it to just hit the outer casing of this engine. So that looks pretty good. Control A, rotation and scale. Go into edit mode. Select all my vertices. Shift D and S. I'm going to scale it down. And now I'm going to scale down to this ring here, this like bulkhead. Shift D, S, scale it down to the inside of that bulkhead, which is also the back edge of the nozzle plates, and then Shift D, S, and then bring it down here. Now the engine's a little off in angle. The photograph's a little bit off at an angle. So this is kind of, the closer we get to the tip, the more off it's going to be. But a little bit high here, a little bit short there. It's probably not too bad. So now we've got these four concentric rings. Let me move this back a bit, and I'm going to set origin to geometry just to make sure that the origin of the circle is there. And I'm going to take our image plane, shift select our circles, control P to parent it. That way if I move my circles, my image plane goes with it, and I can hide my airplane. I don't need to see that, and I don't need mirror on for now. So let me go to my geometry here. I'm just going to turn this stuff off too. I'm going to select a ring, put my cursor right there. I'm going to select my circles, and I'm going to say Shift S, and then selection to cursor. I'm going to go look at it from the back, RZ90, and I just rotated it around so you can see that it's all that way. Hit GY. Let's change the transparency there so we can see through a little bit. So we can see our engine there. So now I'm going to take, with my circles selected, since I have this parented to them, if I shrink the circles, I shrink my image plane, and I'm shrinking down to the center because I have my origin sent there. So now I can shrink this down, and make this a little more transparent so I can see a little better. What we want is our outer circle to match up with the outer circle on the engine, and we want this circle here. So we know we're centered because we got this circle matching there. It's not going to match quite on the outside because the engine is angled, so we're going to get a little bit lower there than we are on the other side. But since our diameter for the outside is side to side edges is pretty close, I think these other things are all right. So what this tells us is this is the exterior. This is where the that bulkhead is. You can see it better. Where this bulkhead is, like there's an air gap between the outside and the inside. Then there's a bit of a bulkhead that goes from here to here, and then these nozzle plates go from here to here. So I can unparent this. Alt P, keep transformation, and I'm just going to lock that so it doesn't get moved. Probably make it a little less transparent. Now this guy we're going to push back along the y-axis, and we're going to move these rings to where they need to be. So these rings, these outer rings, which are the outside skin, the top and bottom of this bulkhead, as well as the back edge of the fins, I'm pretty sure all that stuff ends up right on this line. So I'm going to hit GY and move that stuff there. So those are all there. This inner circle here is this ring here, And if we look at this drawing here, you can see that there's a bit of a gap. I don't know exactly how far this is back, but we're going to go in the side, and I'm going to move it to maybe there. I'm just kind of comparing what this looks like compared to what this looks like. You know, obviously a guess. We don't really like guessing, but it's kind of where we are. All right, so that tells us a lot about where these nozzles are. So we can hide this, and I'm going to select this one, and right click, and I can say bridge, and it'll fill that gap between the two rows. And this shape here hopefully is this conical shape formed by these nozzle plates. Let's bring back, see how that looks. And I'm just going to hide this for a moment. Just kind of a quick comparison between this and this over here. Yeah, it's close, I guess. I mean, once these things open up and stuff, just try to decide if they're quite long enough. Maybe a little longer. Something like that. All right, so this is going to define the shape of our cone for when the nozzles are compressed. All right, because you can see how they're all squeezed together and they form a circle there. So let's hide that, and then we'll use this bit here to make a couple of tools. So I'm going to duplicate this, hit P to separate it, and we're going to use this to make a shrink wrap target that we'll use later on to make sure everything maintains this conical shape, because we're going to be adding some details to these petals later, and it's a lot easier to do kind of this sculpting stuff if you've got a shrink wrap target to maintain that cone. So I'm going to hit the G key twice, pull it back along the normals, hit C so I can go the other direction, and do the same thing on this side. C, move it on the other direction, and that just makes sure that the edges of the shrink wrap target are beyond the edges of our cone. And that way we're not trying to shrink wrap against an edge. So let's make this smooth, shade smooth, and let's change this to a wire so we don't see it, and we can just hide that for now. So let's use this piece again. I'm going to duplicate it, P selection, you can hide this, and now we're going to use this as a primitive for these petals. Unfortunately, well, there are 8 petals, and unfortunately the number of vertices we have here is not divisible by 8. So I need to add 12 edge loops in here to bring up to 48. So I'm going to hit Control R, and I'm just going to scroll my wheel. If you look in the bottom left-hand corner, you can see 11, 12 edge loops. And let's go into front mode, and let's make sure rotation and scale are applied. And if I select the outer edge, the inner edge, right-click, Loop Tools, Space, and let's choose Parallel, and that gives us our 48. And now just to kind of clean things up a little bit, because that can sometimes, it might not quite be a circle. So what I want to do is I want to add a shrink wrap. We're going to bring back our things here. Let's get rid of this, hide this, hide this. And now we can use that shrink tool to make sure that this fits down, snugs down nicely. So let's go to shrink wrap, and we'll choose this as the target, and that'll just make sure that cone works properly. And let's hide this, and let's do it again, just make sure we're still spaced nicely. All right, so now we have a cone that has a number of vertices that's divisible by 8. So what we really need now, as we go into maybe the back view, we want to rotate the whole thing so that one of these seams is lined up with the vertical axis right here. And we're going to do this because it's a little easier to model these petals if we're looking at one that's perfectly horizontal. So I'm just going to choose that one on the top like that. And we need 6 faces, so 2, 3, 4, 6, right? 6. I'm going to hit P to separate them, and you know, we don't need these others, so I can actually just delete those. So now we've got our first petal there. In fact, I don't need to keep seeing this for now. Call it IP engine ortho, but let's hide it so we don't keep revisiting it. We're going to hide that, and we don't need our tool right now. We can hide that for a moment, and this, we'll call this petal shrink, just so we can figure out what it is later. We can hide that as well. We don't want to ever see it. So there is the beginning of our first petal, and this is our tool. Call this ortho tool. We don't need to keep seeing that either. All right, so there's our first bit there. Let's name this. We'll call it engine exterior. And let's just hide it for now. We don't need to keep seeing it, just so we can focus on the petal here. And I'm going to change the drawing we have to something that's maybe a little more useful. We'll bring one in here. There we go. And let's go to the top view. And I don't need to see our image planes anymore. Let's set origin to geometry. That'll put it right there. And we're just going to get rid of half of these so we can turn on a mirror modifier. Only do half as much work. So let's just draw in some of these, landmarks here. So this is kind of comes in. We got a line that comes in. So I'm going to select a point, hit G a couple times, bring it in, maybe bring this one out a little bit because it kind of comes out and it goes around like that. And then just kind of space those out. And then I want, there's a ridge right here on the front. So let's put an edge loop there for that. There's a thicker ridge along the back. So let's kind of put that one there. And then there's a gap and then another ridge. So we'll put it maybe like that. Another one here because there's a smaller gap here and then there's a bigger gap. So we got 1, 2, 3 gaps. So that's open, 1, 2, 3. So one more here, right? So we got this space here, which is probably a little further forward. A little more forward, so it's a skinnier bit. That's this bit here. And then we got this bigger open bit here, and then this bit back here, which is this. And then we have also a ridge down the middle, so I'm going to put one right there. And that'll be this bit here. So let's make these, give them some thickness. So I'm going to hit Control B to bevel them. I'm going to turn off this stuff because we can't really see what's going on. So Control B to bevel them. That'll give these ridges some thickness, like that. And maybe we'll put one more here just to help with that curve. And we can add some in, and we'll do one more there. And we'll space these out between here. And see if we do parallel. How's that work? Yeah. All right, so that spaced those lines out nicely there. So now we need to, it's probably not a bad idea to periodically apply, duplicate and apply the shrink wrap. So I'm going to duplicate it. And if I turn it on, you can see how that changes the arc there. So I'm going to apply that duplicate. And I'm going to duplicate this before I go any further and just hide it, just so we have a backup of this piece before we start pushing and pulling things. So go back in the top view. I'm going to spin it around so it's kind of looking like I'm drawing there. And we can see that back here I've got a raised piece. So let's kind of just raise some of this stuff up and see what it starts to look like in 3D. So got our edges here. And this one extends a little bit out, so pull it out like that and down the middle. That'll be our raised bits. So let's hit E. Oh, I want these two on here because front gets one too. In fact, what we should also do is there's an L-shaped piece here, so let's put that in as well while we're here. So maybe like that. And I'm going to hit G key twice and then E so that I can go parallel to edges. You can see this little red dot near my cursor. If I hit F, it switches, and that helps Blender, make a parallel edge. So I've got a parallel edge there. I just want to space those out. So I'm going to just make sure that I didn't do as much as I wanted to. I was hoping it would go all the way down this edge here, but it didn't. So I'm just going to space these guys out. Sometimes that parallel thing works well. Sometimes it can't quite figure out what you want. So I'm just making these spaced out. All right. So now let's go back and select this edge because that's a ridge. That'll be ridge there. Then we go from here to there, here to there, here to there, here to there. Oops, that was too much. And then across the back, kind of sticks out a bit. And then this. And I think that'll be pretty close to what we want. We got 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 panels, split in the middle, and then in the back, we're going to have a raised bit here for the hinges. All right, so let's hit E to extrude. We're just going to raise that up a bit. I'm going to turn off mirror for a moment, and I want these faces here. I'm going to go into front view, and I'm going to go into cursor mode. I'm going to hit Shift C, and that's going to put my cursor, actually it's going to put my cursor in the origin. That's not what I want. I want my cursor in the middle of my object. So let me put my cursor to selected. That's what I want. All right, let's try this again. Now I want to select these faces. Go down there, select that one. And if you look from the front view or the back view, you can see how it's canted this way, and that's going to mess up the mirror. So we turn on the mirror, you see there's a gap. So I'm just going to hit SX0, and it's going to straighten it out. X faces, and that'll clean that up. All right, and there's our raised section. Now I'm going to bring back that piece we hid before, this guy. And I'm going to hit GZ and bring it straight down a bit. This is going to be our bottom face for this. The reason it should fit because I got all the same edges, I think, still. So let me combine them. So boom, boom, Control J, and then I'm just going to use the F key to fill the gap here. So yeah, I missed, there's one there. All right, let's try it. Just move this one this way a little bit. Keep it square. And then there's another one here that needs to be added. Squaring it up a bit. Bring it all the way around. And one last one. All right, so that is that. Now let's square up the front. We want this plate to be flat there. So what I can do is I can use this to create a shrink wrap. I'll just take the two ends here. So Shift D, P, change the selection, object. Go in here, and I'm just going to join these two together, F And then this is going to give me basically a face that I can shrink this front down to, so I don't have this shape here. I want it plainer, and I want it to make I want it to be maintaining this particular face. So because this face goes along the normals, so I'm going to hit G twice, C up, G twice, C down, and that gives me my shrink wrap. Make it a little bigger, just so it extends past the target. And then let me hide this for a moment, or make it see-through. Now I can select all the faces here, add them to a group, a vertex group, call it front, go into our modifiers, call this one F for front, choose the front group, and then we're going to shrink against that face. See how that tightens it up nicely? So before and after. That's awesome. So let's duplicate that and apply it. And I'm just going to turn this off, but stick it up here just in case I need to use it later, because we might move stuff around a bit. Let's hide that. And yeah, we can't use the shrink wrap right now. Let's mirror it. So let's take these guys and just move them out a little bit so we're not quite so close. Yeah, that's all right. All right, so if we just put, let's add in these hinges here, and let me see if I can find another picture here. It shows how these are angled because they're not straight up and down. Try that one. You can see how it angles toward the middle. So if we're looking at it from here, they extrude up. Maybe from there, but their face angles toward the middle of the petal. So easy. Just going to move it straight up. I'm going to move these this way. And then these this way. This way also. In fact, I'm just going to delete this for a moment so that everything straightens out for me. I'll put another edge loop in there. Just clean it up. That way it gives me a nice straight edge there. Yeah, unfortunately, I don't really have great drawings of these hinges, so we're just gonna. Now, the good thing is, these hinges are going to be deep inside the engine, so it's going to be hard to see them. But we'll say that's close enough. Let me bring in the other drawing, the other picture back. That's a little better. Yeah, like I said, it's going to be hard to see this stuff, so. I want to straighten this line out. So let's put, so what I did, I selected these two endpoints, cursor to selected, and then while I'm in cursor mode, hit S0. It's going to move it right along that line. And that'll give me a little straighter edge there. And let's do the same thing here. All right. So that'll be our hinge. And this could probably go up. make it flatter. The nice thing is this is a cast piece, so there's going to be some rounding stuff, and also it's going to be kind of deep inside, so I'm not super worried about the details in the back as long as everything fits together. All right, so let's go back to our subdivision, our modifiers here. Turn on subdivision, obviously too rounded, so we need to add some bevels to this to make things nice and sharp. So let's add a bevel modifier. We're going to put this up here above the subdivision, make it 1 millimeter, 2, and weight. And we'll turn off mirror for a bit. Go into edit mode, and we're just going to select some edges that we know we want to have nice and crisp. And we'll start there and kind of add more as we think we need them. All right, so bevels, subdivision. All right, so that tightened up some of these edges. We need these edges as well. Oh, you know what I didn't do? Merge by distance and adjust the normal. So I just hit Shift N because the normals for the bottom bit were backwards, which is why that weird stuff was happening there. So let's take a look. We'll just kind of start in the corner here and work around. So this is sharp there. Add a weight to that. And you see when you do that weight, you get this kind of weird pinching. So I'm going to add another weight there, and we'll see if that gives us a nice clean edge. All right, let's smooth this. Now we're getting there. Let's put the but this is also too high, so let's bring this down because this edge is less than those edges. So we're going to normal, move, median. That'll put our cursor right here. We can just push this right along the normals down to there. And let's add a sharp edge to the middle here. And one there. And let's turn on bevel so we can see them. That's better. Let's try that. Bevel, subdivision. All right, it's starting to come along. Now this edge here kind of fades in. So I want this to go, I'm just hitting G key, the G key a couple times so that this kind of blends in here. That's what we want. But let's add our bevels along here and see how that looks. Let's see, we got all those edges marked. How's it starting to look? All right, I missed a couple. Missed these corners. Make those a 1. I missed this corner. I don't want to see seams right now. They're less important. So I'll turn off seams. And I'll make that a 1. Now you can see that still doesn't resolve these weird fillets, and that's just because the bevel needs a little more information to pull it tight. So if I select these two, change that up to 1, we'll get some nice corners there. Looks like I missed one there. I really like the bevel modifier. It's, you could do all this by adding edge loops everywhere, but the geometry would just go through the roof. And for a part that's kind of in the background and small, I think this is a much better way to go. You really cut down the amount of geometry you have, and often you can get a pretty clean looking model without having to go crazy with your geometry. So I'm going to put one there, bevel, and I don't know if I'm missing one there, and we'll need one, say there. Now, sometimes when you do that, there's going to be some pinching on the surface. I don't know that would really make a difference on this. 1, because it's going to be inside the engine, and 2, because it's kind of a cast surface, so it's already going to have some bumps and stuff. It's not like it's super smooth. See what I got. those corners there. All right. And maybe take these. I'm just looking to clean up this bit here. And we'll need one back here. Just to pull it down tight. All right, let's take the put the mirror back on. See how that looks. The mirror. Let's put the mirror up there. I don't like that dimple there. I suspect that our center line isn't quite center, so I'm going to put the cursor right there. Go into front view. Yeah, see how it's extending over there. So I'm just going to select that whole center line. In cursor mode, I'll hit SX0. That's going to bring that to be perfectly straight. And then when I turn back on the mirror, we should get a nice, that cleans up there a little bit. Let's see if that shrink wrap, because there's still a little bit of a dimple there. So all those bits are part of the shrink wrap. Confused why that isn't pulling straight. Just making sure my shrink wrap plane goes all the way across. I don't like the way it's pulling across there. It's obviously not straight. So let me do something else here. Let's get rid of this. And just take like this face here. We'll make this the make that the new shrink wrap. So Shift D, P, turn all this stuff off, except for mirror. Bottom clipping, GX, that'll bring it straight across. 2, bring it up along the normals, down along the normals, like that. All right, so hopefully this will do a better job. So let's apply the mirror. And we'll get rid of all these, and we'll just make sure it's straight by getting rid of that edge there. So we'll use that as our guide. And see if we can clean this up. Wire. And then for our shrink wrap on this guy, I'm going to choose this. And it does mess up the back edge a little bit, but you know, we can fix that as well. But it does give us a nice, I like that clean edge there. It's a lot better. All right, so let's duplicate this. I'm going to move it back. Let me turn it back on so that it's textured. So I can see where it's intersecting. I'm just going to move it back until it gets right to this corner. So now I have 2 parallel planes here. I'm going to use the second plane to shrink the back edge, this edge here, these faces. So I want these to be parallel to that front. So I'm going to create another group called F2, assign those, and then create another shrink wrap. Let's apply this shrink wrap, duplicate, apply it. Create another shrink wrap, hold F2, F2, and then choose this guy, and that'll snap that down so it's nice and parallel to the front. Apply that. We'll just keep it around just in case we need it. So how's that look? So we don't have this middle section here for the actuator arm, so we need to add that. So let's turn, I can leave mirror on, and I'm going to set flat so I can see a little better. And this goes right in the middle here, so I'm going to need another edge here. I'm going to make it parallel to the middle, something like that. And I need to fill this in, fill that in, delete this face. So we're going to make a hole here. So I want to extract these two edges and the bottom straight out, EX. And since I already still have my cursor there and I'm still in cursor mode, I can hit SX0 and that'll bring my little gap there right to the middle. Now I just need to merge these, so I can select one, select the other, M, merge at last. Do the same thing here, merge at last, and that'll tighten that up. I can put a bevel in the bottom here. And this might actually be a little too thick, so I'm going to select this guy, go into face move, or face mode, so active element, and I'm moving along the normals, so I can just push it this way without distorting the surface at all, which is good. And I need a little bump here in the middle so that actuator arm can get put in. So I'm missing, I just did my normals there because I wasn't, I think I'm missing something here because I can't do a control R. You know, oh, I didn't join, did I join all these? I must have like some odd weird face in here. I have this face here. That should be gone. And so should this one and this one. I had manifold faces. All right, so I bet if I hit Control R now, yeah, there we go. So I'm just going to add a couple edge loops there so I can raise this middle bit. And again, I want to do it on the normals, the median, and we'll just bring the middle one up. And that'll give us this bit here. So let's see what that looks like mirrored and beveled. So we need to add some bevels here. Like that. And one there. Tighten that up. And we need new corners here, so let's add those corners. In fact, maybe the corners we could take out. Make it look more like a casting. Yeah, that's better. Yeah, let's do that. Yeah, I think I'm just going to go with a sharp. Sorry about that. I'm just going to go back to keeping it sharp. It's going to be an interior detail that it's going to be very hard to see, so we'll just keep it clean. The other alternative would be to add a whole bunch of edge loops and stuff to, you know, create some nice broader corners. You know what I can do? Also, I can maybe make the bevels a little less tight. Let's try that. Because right now I think I have them set pretty low. So let's put these back on. Turn on the bevel and the subdivision. But adjust the actual modifier so that the bevels aren't nearly as tight. So let's go back into bevel and maybe make this 5. That'll make everything softer. At some point it's not going to make it any softer, but you can see the difference. Like 0.5 is really sharp. You know, 8's a lot softer. So let's keep it at 8, and that'll be our bevel. I think I want to tighten up this bit here. It should go higher. And these should be lower. Yeah, I think it's fine. Just leave it that way. All right, so there is our first petal. Let's turn everything back on again. Unhide stuff. Probably done with these, but we'll keep them around just in case. Call this petal, or engine petal. Turn on the engine exterior. And we can turn on our ortho tool, because we're going to need that for other stuff. Still maintaining that cone, which is good. All right, that's one petal down. It's probably a good idea to get the UVs squared away on this piece. We're going to need 16 of these, so we might as well do the UVs now on one and then not have to worry about doing 16 of them later. So I'm going to turn off all my modifiers, and I'm going to show seams, hide bevels. And we're just going to take a look around here, just walk around, make sure that the seams make sense. So I can clean up, add a seam here, that's probably fine. Mark the seam, maybe one there. I'm going to be using Substance Painter to paint this, so I mean, Substance Painter is pretty good about projecting textures across seams. I can probably get rid of that one, have it go across there, and I probably want one there, so that all comes off. And certainly want some in the corners here. Make sure all my corners are seamed. Definitely want some along there. And along there. And there. And there. Alright, so let's mark that. Mark those seams. Bring this down. Go to UV Editor. Select everything. U for unwrap. And see what we got. Could probably clean these faces up there, just to keep some of the stretching down maybe. I definitely want some seams here. Missed that. This is the inside cut for that actuator arm. Let's clean that out. And maybe one there, one there, one there, one there. I'm just kind of trying to break it up here a little bit so that we don't have any stretching. Mark seam, all unwrap. Where's that guy? Yeah, we'll put a seam there. Oops. Alright, that looks pretty good. Now we can apply the mirror to this. And now we're going to unwrap the whole thing again, just to make sure we didn't introduce any weird islands. How does this look? Everything's looking pretty symmetrical. I don't see any really weird shapes, so that looks good to go. Now we can turn back on our stuff and unhide everything. Let's do a little bit more cleanup before we go further. I want to get rid of these. These are the shrink wraps for the front of the plate. And the plate itself we can clean up. We don't need these modifiers. We don't need the underlying shrink wrap. And we don't need these two vertex groups. So now this guy is ready to go. Clean up all the extra junk that we don't need. You know, I think I'll actually make this a 1. That'll make it an even softer look. So I guess we'll leave it at that. Let's hide the engine for a moment. And we're going to put our cursor right in the middle of our tool here, going into rear view. I'm going to hide my tool. With my cursor set to 3D cursor, I'm going to make 8 duplicates of this. I'm going to hit Shift D to duplicate, right click to cancel, R 45. I'm just going to keep doing that all the way around until I have 8. And we'll eventually mirror them over to the other side, but looks like we've got decent seams between them, so that's good. Let's build the frame that goes around the back of the engine here. So we need to build this frame as well as these stringers here. So let's hide our engine, and I'm going to select and duplicate these two rows of our tool. Shift D, right click to duplicate, P to separate, and it looks like I might have gotten some extra junk in there. I did. So get rid of this guy, we don't need that. And I'm just going to select on opposing edges, hit F, and then just hold the F key down and go all the way around. Bring everything back in. And I only want, I can hide the tool for a moment. I only want from like here to here, because this line only goes up to the top of the hinges. So I can get rid of these faces. Maybe I'll keep them just as a, now I can get rid of them. Delete these faces. And then we need to make 16 of these stringers here. So I'm going to bring back the tool just so we can see what we're doing. Going to rear view mode here. Going to edit. I'm going to put my cursor right at the top here. And I'm going to create a plane, shrink it down, and this detail is going to be really buried inside the engine, so I'm not super worried about it being particularly precise here. Let's give a little bit of a bend to it there. Move this up. I'm going to tuck this behind there. So let's go like this, this, EY, and just bring it back. This will be all tucked inside the engine. Get rid of these faces, X, get rid of these faces. Go to front view, and I'm going to apply my rotation and scale, and let's add some thickness to it. Obviously too thick, maybe 3. Even thickness, that'll fix that up. And let's bring back the engine just for a moment, just to make sure it's not too proud. So I'm going to move it down and then rotate it up so it kind of follows the contour of the engine, like that. Type the engine again, and just bring it forward a little bit. I just want it behind this wall. In fact, with this wall, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that EY and just move it forward like that, just so we have a little lip there. Put a bevel on that. See, move this up here, change it to 1, 2, weight, that'll give us, put a bevel there, there we go, bevel, that'll give us a nice crease there, and mark the seam while I'm here, just so we don't have to do it later. And then this guy can go back a little bit, so it's tucked all the way in. And these are kind of rounded. I know there's two different shapes, there's one that's angled and one that's kind of squared. I'm not going to bother making them different. So let's apply the solidify, and let's just round the edges a little bit with a bevel. So I'm going to do a double click on the edge there, Control B, and just give it a rounded corner like that. And then we can select this front edge, bevel weight it, Control E, mark the seam, and then we don't need these faces at all because they're all going to be tucked inside, so we can get rid of those. Now we are going to have to put a sharp edge on here. So if I put a subdivision on, let me put the bevel on first, and we put a maybe 1 there, 2 there, weight, and you can see that it, then we'll put a subdivision on, sorry, subdivision. You see how the corners, the back end tuck up like that? The way you avoid that is just putting a mean crease on there, and then that stays tight. Shade smooth, and we got our piece there. Since we've got 16 of these, we just want to make sure they're unwrapped properly. That looks fine. Alright, so if we go back into front mode, I'm going to move my cursor back to the center of our tool, edit this bit, select all, Shift D, rotate 45, 45, Go all the way around. Do it. I have an extra one. Sorry. Get rid of that one. I'm going to select all, Shift D, and I rotate 22.5 degrees. Split the difference, and now we've got all our stringers running around there. Let's bring back our engine. Yeah, they actually stick up inside the frame, so let's select them all. And with my cursor still in the middle there, I'm going to hit S, not Y. So I held the Shift key and the Y key so it doesn't stretch it in the Y direction. I'm just pulling it in from the X and the Z axis. So that brings them down. All right, that's pretty good. And let's see. We could actually want to, there's a bit of a lip there, so maybe I'll add that as well. So I'll take this whole thing, move it back, bring up an edge here, bring down an edge here. I'm going to turn off subdivision for a moment. EY, just bring that forward to create that lip. And of course we have to bevel these edges as well. Mark the seams. And yeah, it's probably a little thicker than it needs to be, so let's take median. And I hit S and then not Y because I don't want to scale it along the Y. So when I say not Y, I mean Shift Y, exclude the Y direction. So I selected everything, Shift Y, S, Shift Y, and then I can scale without having to worry about scaling it along the Y axis. So let's see what that looks like. All right. And probably push these back now a bit because we pushed that thing back. Maybe make these tighter. All right, I think that's good. I mean, it's a detail that's in there. It's kind of cool, but certainly not the most obvious detail we've got going on there. Let's build the inner lining that goes between the nozzle and the afterburner. Now, I don't know exactly where this goes, but I do have an image plane that kind of shows the engine inside the airplane here. So if I go to image planes, IP engine, turn it on, you can see, turn off some of this other stuff. You can see the engine, and then this black section here is where the afterburner unit is. So I'm pretty sure that the part of the plane we want to, part of the engine we want to build is going to live right about here. Let me bring another picture in. Bring this one in. Kind of see the inside here. So this is the unit we're going to start building, the afterburner. You can see that there's an inner lining that has steps along it, and then even bigger step here. This is all for airflow to keep the hot gases from actually melting the back of the engine. So I'm pretty sure that this line here is about where all this stuff lives. All right, let's create an empty right here in the middle, or right at the beginning of where the afterburner starts. So I'm going to put an edge loop there, cursor to selected, and I'm going to create an empty, and let's call it Afterburner Center. Turn on its name, lock it so I don't accidentally move it, and that's going to be where the far end of the internal can is. So let's isolate this guy for a moment and turn off our modifiers. I'm going to take this inner edge here, and I'm going to duplicate it, D, move it over here, P for selection, and I'm going to, in object mode, I'm going to say set origin to geometry, and then I'm going to move it over to where our afterburner end is. So Shift S, selection of cursor, and that's going to put it right at the beginning of our afterburner. I can now hit Control J to join these two together. Select that edge ring, select this edge ring, right click, Loop Tools, Bridge. And if it seems a little cockeyed like this, you can just change the twist and that should straighten things out nicely. And then that is the inside of our can. Looks like normal's a little weird, so I'm going to hit Shift A, normals, Shift N, I'm sorry, A to select everything, Shift N to set the normals. That cleans up those weird shadows. We can turn back on our subdivisions. Now the reason I didn't just extrude this straight forward is because you remember the engine itself is slightly angled, and if I had extruded it straight forward, the interior lining would have been too close to the top and too far away from the bottom. So that gives us a lining that's parallel to the outside of the engine. Now let's add some of the details to the inside here. I'm going to bring a different picture over. Gives us a better idea. So there are 7 steps, and there's a break, and there's a bigger step, and then there's, it goes forward until it hits, this wall at the back of the Afterburner. So we know that this line here is this line there. So I'm just going to hit Control R, and this is all kind of like, freehand here at this point, since I don't really have any measurements. So I'm going to say that this line is maybe there. And then there's another one in front of it. There's a bit of a break. And then that's this line here. And then there are 7 steps that go along here. You can see they have all these tiny little holes for air that comes through. And if you're really going crazy, you could put alpha channels on those if you wanted to show those off. Let me turn that off. And I'm going to hit Control B to bevel these just a little bit. I'm going to take every other one and going to individual origins and hit S. I'm just going to scale them in, and because it's individual origins, it's not going to scale along the y-axis, it's just going to scale each one. Scale it a little bit more, maybe a little bit less. Okay, and then I'm going to take adjacent ones and then SY0 to create those steps. So that's that. And then we've got a raised section that's like right in here. So I'm going to take this bit, duplicate it, Shift D to duplicate it, and I'm going to scale it but not in the Y direction. So it just pulls it in without making it any shorter. It's going to go to about there maybe. And I'm going to hit P to separate that. Well, let's just add some bevels to these. And we can turn this back on. See what that looks like. All right, it's starting to look pretty cool. Let's work on this bit here. I can isolate it. And I'm going to select that, hit F, and then I to inset it. And I'm just going to get rid of these faces. We don't need that. And while I'm in edit mode, I'm going to put my cursor right basically inside the circle. And I'm going to say set origin to 3D cursor, because we're going to use this origin layer to define the location of this piece here. So we can just do that easily by selecting this piece. So let's add a bevel here, clean that up. And we need to add some thickness to it. Actually, I'm going to mark my seam while I'm here. And we'll pick like up here. It's going to be hard to see that. Mark seam there. All right, so let's add some thickness to this. Apply rotation and scale first, because solidify does not work very well without it. Maybe set shade flat so we can see a little better. That seems pretty thick compared to that, so maybe 5, maybe even 4. All right, make it too thin, it's just going to be two-dimensional. So we'll leave it there, and we want even thickness. And I wonder if turn off. Yeah, we'll leave that on. And we'll clean up the unseen bits later. So apply that. I'll go in here, and we don't need this back face here because no one's going to see that. So I can delete that face. And these edges are just going to pull them back there a bit. And we need to add our bevels and our seams. So set bevel edge to 1, mark seam, and here I'm going to get rid of this face. No, I want that face. I want this edge here. I'm going to move this back to GY just to give it some thickness. We'll probably tuck it back after we build that part there, but let's mark the seam, mark 1 for bevel, shade smooth, turn everything back on. All right, put everything back. Starting to look like an engine. Let's hide the outer bit here. All right, let's make these spacers next. So I just want this bit and this bit. Isolate them, and I'm just going to hide this for a minute. And I want to put my cursor right here in the front of the Afterburner. And I'm going to create a mesh plane. Edit mode, scale it down. GZ, and I'm in edit mode because I want the origin of my plane to remain there in the center. GY, GZ, we're just going to make that little tunnel bit. Let's extract this EY, just bring it back a little bit. We don't need to go back very far because you can't see. And get rid of those faces. Now let's bring back the outer bit here. And just going to bring this up so that it just touches like that. All right, so let's hide this. Make sure my rotation and scale is applied to it. Going to add a solidify to it. Make it 2 millimeters, even thickness. That's what that looks like now. And let's add an empty here, right in the middle here. Apply rotation scale, the empty, and we're going to use an array modifier to wrap this around. So we need 28 of these things. Set that to 0, object offset, and we're going to choose our empty. And then all we have to do is rotate that empty 360 divided by 28, and that'll create a circular array of all of our parts. They all look like they're fitting okay. So let's make this a little better. Notice they're a little bit rounded. We could apply our solidify modifier, edit it. I'm going to add a bevel to this. Oh, you know what? Doesn't need it. I'm going to do this. Yeah, we'll do a bevel. And we'll do this. Sorry, being wishy-washy there. So that I want to add a bevel to. And I don't need this face here. Get rid of that. X faces. Just hide this for a minute. I don't need this face either. But I do want to make sure these back edges remain sharp after I put a subdivision on it. So I want mean crease to be 1. And let's add a bevel to this. Say 1 millimeter, 2, weight, 8.5 millimeters, make it thin, and then a subdivision, and we don't need more than 1 on that. Shade smooth. All right, see how that looks. It looks all right. And one last thing to do before we actually apply that array modifier is I want to make sure I got my UV set up for this guy. So Control E, mark seam, unwrap, and then that's nicely done. And then I can apply my array. And there we go. Got our spacers in there. All right, next, why don't we build this piece here? We just need this for that. And I can push that up. And I'm going to put my cursor right in line with that vertex. And let's create a circle, mesh circle. And we want something that's divisible by 4. So 32 is probably fine. And maybe like that. Edit mode. And S, scale it down to maybe there. I'm just kind of looking at this, comparing it to that. And then I want a ring out here for that outer ring. And then I want 2 more rings. And Control B to bevel these. And I'm just using my scroll wheel to get rid of those center lines. I don't want them. So that gives us the concentric rings there. And I do want that. So let me get rid of these because we don't need them. All right, so those are our rings. And I need to make these cross bits here. And I can just make those as separate pieces. I don't need to incorporate them into it. That would just add a lot of extra geometry. But these pieces are kind of rounded though. So what I want to do is I'm going to put an edge loop in each one of these. I'm going to GY to move it forward. And Control B to bevel it. And that'll just round them out. Apply rotation and scale. Let's go back to the rear view here. And I'm going to add a plane. And this is going to be one of these X braces here. So SZ. And it's pretty thin, so SZ, bring it up. GY, so it's in front. SZ, about like that. R down the middle. I'm going to take the 2 back edges, push them back. GY. Take the middle edge, bevel that a little bit. And then move the whole thing forward a bit so it's in front of it. And oops, I want to do this. SZ. And I'm just going to tuck the top and bottom in. So I'm going to Control R in the middle of it, Control B, and just scale it up and down. Sorry. Yeah, Control B, scale it up and down. Take those 2. I'm just going to hit SZ to scale it up just to short of the tip there. And then I'm going to pull these back and just tuck them in. So SY. Yeah, this is going to be deep inside the engine, so I'm not super concerned that it's not 100% precise. So SY. Like that. Select the whole thing. 3D cursor. Shift D to duplicate it. R 90 degrees. Select this guy. And then R 45 degrees. And that gives us that bit. Now this outer ring is a little thicker maybe, so I'm going to hit Alt S. Make it a little thicker. Alright, it's starting to look like something. And then this middle bit, let's see if I can find a picture of it. Alright, so that's what this piece looks like in the center. So I'm going to take this whole thing, move it forward, so it's in front of that. EY, push it back. It'll go further into the engine later, probably. And I'm going to get rid of these vertices. And there's a little bit of a cone shape to it, so EY and go to median, S, and S to flare it out a little bit. And let's see what we're going to do. Select an edge, ES, EY, F to fill it. And I'm not going to worry about these cutouts there. Maybe push it back a little bit, like that. And let's put some bevels on our edges here. So we want those to be sharp. And I think I want the back edges of these to go further back. So GY, just so they go back like that. Let's add a bevel to this. 2, 2, and weight. Shade smooth. Subdivision, smooth it out. Let's bring back another drawing, another picture of the unit. All right. I'm going to move this thing back, I think, further. Or maybe scale it. Make it a little stubbier. Bring everything back. Yeah, this is probably too small, so let's make it bigger. Push it back. Maybe not too much. Maybe squatter. All right, we'll do some more stuff here because there's some compressor blades that get put in there. I'm going to say it looks reasonable. Let's add in these parts here. These are what spray the fuel into the Afterburner, and there's I think there's 24 of them there. So with our cursor right in the middle of this piece, and we can hide everything else. Just isolate that. I'm going to create a cube. Make it skinny. Go to edit mode, GZ, put it up there, GY, put it behind it a bit. Push it down, and we're going to do basically the same thing that we did with the array to spin those spacers around. So get rid of the top and bottom, we don't need that. Put a edge on there, Control E, mark the seam. Object mode, apply rotation and scale. I'm going to place an empty right there, apply rotation and scale for that. Let's add an array to this guy. We want, let's say 24, 0. Object offset, choose our empty there. And if we rotate that, we should helps if I choose it. There we go. And I want to rotate this 360 divided by 24. Give us all of our, I guess, fuel rods or whatever they are for spraying the fuel. And I want to add a subdivision to this guy because they're kind of circular. And that's that for those. So let's make sure they're unwrapped. And then we can apply our array. And we can get rid of that empty. We no longer need it. How does that look? That looks pretty good. Let's add these compressor blades in. I have no idea how many there are. 80, 100, I have no idea. But again, we're just going deeper and deeper in the engine here, so we can keep the cursor where it is, and let's just isolate those two bits. And we're going to do basically the same thing. We're going to create a cube this time, scale it down, scale it up, go into edit mode. I want to keep my origin down here. Hit GY, and it just needs to be maybe that big. SX, SY, and maybe RZ, turn it. I don't think it's quite that big. RZ, yeah, maybe even thinner. SY, and we want to maybe put a point on each side, make it kind of pointy. So SX, and then RZ, something like that. And get rid of the top faces and bottom faces. We don't need them. And this could go up higher. Just needs to tuck in. How does that look with a subdivision on it? So we don't need two on that. And this guy, that's probably fine. So let's put an empty back in here. Empty. Rotation and scale on the empty. We're going to put a array modifier on this. Count to 0. I'm sorry, want to count of maybe 80 and 0. And we want to do object offset. I'm going to choose our empty. Not sure why the screen went purple there. Relative. That's applied. Apply rotation and scale there. There we go. So I want 360 divided by 80. That's probably too much. Let's do something smaller than that. Let's do 50 and Alt R to put that back where it was, and we'll try 360 divided by 50. See if that looks better. Yeah, it looks more reasonable. So let's make sure our UVs are okay. U unwrap. I don't think I have a seam on it yet. The seam there, mark seam. Yep, that's better. So those are our compressor blades. So we can apply our array. And we don't need 2 on that. And we can get rid of this empty. Let's bring everything back. And let's bring this can back a little bit, just so that it goes past those blades. And then, because I don't really want to see necessarily the rest of the way into the engine, I think what I'll do is I will put my cursor here, go to object mode, and I'm going to create a circle, maybe 8, shrink it down so it's just a little bit bigger. In edit mode, all F, and I'm just going to move it forward just a bit. And I'm just going to use this as a blackout. And I have a color called flat black that I assign things like this so that, you know, when we're looking inside, you know, the shader for that is just flat black, fully diffuse black. That just keeps me having to do anything further down there. It's just going to get lost in the darkness. Let's bring back everything. Just make sure that blackout doesn't penetrate the engine. All right. All right, the next thing we need to do is actually more complex. Let me bring in a picture of the edge here. And you can see that there's a fitting that goes around here where the petals actually, when they're open, when it's not in Afterburner mode, these things fit in here and just make a smooth surface. So the next bit to make is this piece with these little triangles. It'd be easier to build this piece if these petals are in the open position. And the easiest way to get these petals in the open position is to put some bones in here so that we can rotate them out. So let's hide this. I don't need to see this anymore. I think we're probably done with that tool. So I'm just going to hide that. And I can hide this for a bit. So I'm going to go to top view. Now I don't need my image plane either. I can hide those as well. And let's put my cursor right in the middle of the scene, Shift C. I'm going to add an armature, just a single bone. GY, I'm just going to move it way up here, shrink it down. And this is going to be the root bone for the rig for the afterburners. So apply rotation and scale. And I'm going to call this burner root. And let's turn on naming so we can see them. Let's name that bone. So we're going to be burner root. Sorry, I should have called the armature burner, not because I was in object mode. So let me hit rename that. We'll just call this burner armature. All right, that's better. So the actual name of the armature is called burner armature, and then when we're in edit mode, this is the burner root bone. Next thing we need to do is we need to put bones all the way around here. But if you remember from before, I said that these things aren't quite centered. So before actually putting any bones in here, I think I want to, let me bring this over, and I have another picture here. Bring that in. So you can see that if this is straight up and down, the seam is just a little bit off to the right. So I want to move these. I'm going to put my cursor right there in the dead center of those, and I'm going to rotate it so that this seam here is kind of like that seam there. All right, and then let's pick that edge there, cursor to selected, go back into edit mode, and we're going to say Shift A to add a bone where the cursor is. And I can do the same thing over here. I can put my cursor right there, cursor to selected, go back into edit mode, and then say selection to cursor. And that's going to snap that bone down to it's just on the centers of the hinge there. And let's rename this bone. We're going to call this P for petal 1.L. And I'm using the .L suffix because I want to use the armature symmetrize function later to copy all the bones from this engine to the right engine, because we don't want to rig this thing twice because there are going to be a lot of bones here. So let's select these again. I'm going to put my cursor back in the middle, go back into edit mode, and in 3D cursor mode, I'm going to say Shift D, rotate 45 degrees, Shift D, R 45. All right, so now we've got our bones all the way around. It's just a quick name them. We'll call this P2, P2.L, and just all the way around. All right, all our bones are named. Now we need to parent them parent the petals to the various bones. So I'm going to select a petal, shift select the armature, go into pose mode, and then Control P and choose bone. And now if we move this bone, change this to Euler, if we move it along the y-axis, you can see how that moves that. In fact, I can just lock these axes. And we're going to do the same thing all the way around. Select the petal, shift select the bone, pose mode, Control P, bone, and then change this to XYZ, block these. All right. All right, so everything's parented now. So each one of these petals is attached to a bone. Let's go to timeline, and we'll make an animation of 120 frames just so we can work with this. And then for each of these P bones here, we want to set a initial keyframe of 0. And now we go to the end of the animation, and let's bring back, let me make sure these are in front, and maybe make them stick so they're a little less big. And let's bring back our casing here so we can see what we're doing. And let's, with this bone, and go into pose mode, and we'll see how many degrees we need to rotate it so that it kind of blends in with the can there. So that's probably about, let's say 17. That looks pretty good. And we want to insert a single keyframe. Make this 17. Insert a single keyframe. So now they're all in the open position, and then if we scroll through our timeline, our petals open and close. So that's kind of cool. All right, so now that they're rigged, we can put them in the open position, and we can think about building that other piece, this piece here, that fits in with them, because we're just going to basically fill in the gaps here with some geometry to make that part. Let's do that by using the petals themselves as a starting point. So take these two petals, and I'm going to go into edit mode, and I want to select just the edges from the middle face here, and then around the edges here, all the way down back here. So I just got, basically half the edge there. I'm going to shift a D to duplicate, right click to cancel my movement, P to separate by selection. I'll hide this guy, hide this guy. I'm going to do the same thing here. Go into edit mode, face, select the face, all the way down here, face, and then all the way down to the middle there. All right, shift D, right click, P to separate. All right, and now we can hide our petals for a bit. Now these are still parented to the bone, so if we move our timeline, they still move. So these need to be unparented. So Alt P and clear. You want to clear, keep the transformation so they don't move, and we can join these two together. And we can do some cleanup here. So let's turn off or disable these guys. And it looks like I took a little bit too much stuff here. That's fine. Just delete it out. We don't need these faces. Delete these faces. And let's merge these together. So I want this, 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 this. I'm just going to delete those because they overlap. We'll get rid of these two. X, get rid of those. Then we'll merge these at center. Oops, merge at center, not cursor. Merge at center. And we shouldn't need all of these edges either. It should be straight. So get rid of these. Maybe leave that one up front. And then we can fill. Well, let's bring back. I just want to make sure I put it on the right side here. Yeah, I would have done it backwards. I want to do a fill it on this side, on the inside. So I'm going to take this guy, edge mode. I'm going to select the top edge, shift select the adjacent edge, hit F to fill, hit F to fill again, F to fill again. And then I want to take, I think I'm just going to space these out so we get a better distribution. So I'm going to click along there, right click, space, and we'll try parallel, see if that works. That straightens all those guys out. And do the same thing here. Just get a nice distribution of points along there. So I'm in edge mode. I'm going to take these edges all the way along here. I'm going to hit E, Y to extrude it straight back. Let's bring back our engine here because we want this edge here to blend in with the tip of the can there. So with that edge selected, I'm going to just bring it forward until it's pretty close. And then I'm going to, we can hide the, let's take these two pieces, isolate these for a minute, hide this for a bit. Now I'm just going to select the edges here, so all the way around here, down to there, and then along the face here. So basically the bottom edges of the thing, and I'm going to add a vertex group to that, assign them at full value, unhide. So take this guy, and we're going to add a shrink wrap modifier using that group that we just created, so the bottom edges. And then I'm going to choose this can here, so you can see that that shrinks down the bottom edge so that it fits right against the inside of the engine there. So that's looking good. So we can, I'm just going to duplicate and apply that in case we need to use it later. Stick it up there and turn it off. Still a little bit more cleanup on this piece before we go any further. So I'm just going to isolate it. And I want to put a bevel on here. Control B, bring it back. Add a couple of edge loops, and then I'm just going to manually bring this down so it's a little bit more of a curve. So median, maybe active element, normal, and just draw it down a little bit just so that it curves in a little bit. All right, let's take a look at our bevels. Make sure we have bevels going on. We don't need them here. Well, I'll leave it there. We might need it later. Bevels there. So let's see what our modifiers look like. Shade smooth. All right, so there's some odd pinching here because I want kind of a rounded piece here. So I'm going to add an edge loop there. I'm going to add an edge loop there. That should tighten that up. And maybe I'll just use the smooth vertex function there just to space those out a little bit. Let's see what that looks like in matcap. Yeah, I can live with that. Okay, back to random. Turn off the matcap. All right, let's bring everything back, take a look. All right, that's fitting okay. Now we need to replicate this around. So I can, if I select the petals and then cursor to select it, that'll put my cursor directly in the middle of all the petals. And I can create an empty here. I create an empty, I'm going to Control A, apply rotation and scale to my empty. And I want to, this object also needs to have its origin here. So I'm going to right click, set origin to 3D cursor. So that's there. And I'm going to apply rotation and scale to that to make sure that's also squared away. And let's add an array to this, we need 8 of these. I want that to be 0, object offset, and we're going to choose our empty. And if we rotate our empty 45 degrees, it should duplicate that piece all the way around, as that works out. Let's move it on top of the stack and turn on merge. That'll clean up some of that stuff. All right, so that's looking okay for now. And we should probably just check UVs before we apply the array modifier. So unwrap. All right, that looks reasonable. So let's apply the array. And let's look for any unmerged vertices. I'm going to select everything merged by distance. I picked up 2 stragglers. There might be more. So I'm just looking for any weird corners, any gaps. See, like over here. So select those M by M at center. That should clean that up. Another one there. M at center. Anybody else? We do not see anyone. All right. I want to re-shrink wrap, but our vertex group is probably not correct anymore since we've added edges and things. So select, you can see that I've got too much going on. I don't want these to be part of that, so remove that. So all I really want is the back edges and then this leading edge here for our shrink wrap. So that looks good. I thought I saw another missing piece. All right, so let's select this, isolate, and let's duplicate and turn on that shrink wrap, see what that looks like. Seems to clean it up pretty well. See how it tightens it up nicely? So let's apply that. Turn our bevel and our subdivision. See what this all looks like in MatCap. And we should probably check our normals. Just because I thought I saw some weird shadowing. Yeah, so the normals in this are backwards. And our can is also backwards. Let's fix that. So Shift N to set the normals, but they're inside, so I want to flip them inside. The flame collector is, the flame holder rather, is also backwards. So Shift N. And so our burner bars are okay. Compressor blades are okay. I think what that red that we're seeing in there is just our blackout piece. So I'm going to hit Shift N and flip that so that it's also black, or blue rather. All right, so all our normals are good right now. Always good to check that periodically. Now let's build the actuator linkage next. So these bits through here, I have a better picture there. I'm not going to super detail this because it's going to be very hard to see. Let's change this back to timeline. And I can hide this for now. So these are the the actuators that go right here. And like I said, I'm not going to super detail this because it's deep inside the engine. It's going to be hard to see. So let's start with a box. Cube. Shrink it down. Yes, it's all eyeball stuff. In fact, I probably have a better picture. Here, this one's better. Gives a little better idea of what that shape is. So there's a box with a cylinder cut out of the middle of it. that. So there's that box. Probably skinnier edges. And push this up. Put a cylinder in there. Neat. Rotate it. Don't need the, no, maybe we'll keep them. Poke them out that way. There's that, then there's this flange piece on top. Maybe add another box. Apply rotation and scale because I'm about to bevel. Bevel works better when you apply rotation and scale, and hit C on the keyboard so they don't pass through each other. So C. That works. Set up a mirror on this so I'm not doing double work. Let me just hide that, all the other stuff. Come on. Alright, that's better. So this comes out kind of like that. And what we'll do is just duplicate this piece. Bring it down. Just a turnbuckle that goes through there. Just using the top of my screen there to as a guide. That could be thinner. Let's look at this. This whole thing angles down. Yep. I think this is smaller. So it goes up higher. lip there. Now, this is going to be deep inside the engine, so it doesn't have to be super accurate. Control B, bevel these. Just clean these up a bit. Somehow my screencast keys got turned off. Sorry about that. All right, and then there's can't see it in this picture, but there's a bar that comes back from here into the engine. So this whole thing moves forward and back. So let me add that bar. And make it a cylinder. Don't need the face, don't need the face. All right, starting to look like something there. Hit M, merge by distance to make sure I don't have any. Oh, see, I did. I had 6 vertices that need to be merged. And put some bevels and subdivisions on this. All right, make all those beveled. Make them seams as well. Let's add a bevel. And add a subdivision. Add one in there. One there. Mark a seam on the bottom of these things. Tighten this up front and back. Shade smooth, get a better idea. Mirror it. I think I want to put a bevel there, there, no, not there. Crisp that up. Back here. Make this a little smaller so it doesn't stick out of that bearing there. Don't want that. All right, I can live with that as this piece. Let's do a quick UV unwrap, just make sure everything's good. Sure we don't have any weirdness going on here. That looks all right. Let's apply the mirror, re-unwrap it, make sure it's still good. Still good. All right. Let's bring back our stuff. And now we get to scale this and kind of put it in place. So here, something like this. I think I want to move this rod down. So I want to go into medium point, turn my arrows on. I want it to be by local because I want to move it down along this object's z-axis. And I'm going to put a back on this right there. So this bar has something to go into. And then I can make the bar a little bigger. So it looks undersized for the work it's going to do. And it's hard to tell in this picture, but there's actually a plate that goes there behind it. So Alt R just to square it back up again. Look at it from the front. Edit mode. Edit mode. And let's add that plate as a cube. You know, I can see it in my pure ref on my right-hand panel. I know it's not visible in up here, but it's there. Let's bevel and seam these. Bring everything back. This is smaller. Bring it back. Apply rotation and scale while it's square, and then I can rotate it. Just looking at the corners here, see if it seems to be lined up pretty well there. And this piece needs to go back. So it's tucked in there. Like that. Yeah, as long as this is lined up here, we're in good shape. Alright, so there's one part, and we just want to double check, make sure it doesn't stick out of the casing at all. It seems okay there. This piece here, all of these move in unison, so we can, if we go to rear view, let's make sure our cursor is where it's supposed to be. And if we go to rear view, go to edit mode, select everything, Shift D, and I want to make sure, I'm in 3D cursor, R45, Shift D, R45. All right, so we got all those pieces lined up there. They all seem to be where they need to be. All right, so then let's build the little end of the turnbuckle that's going to go here. So this piece there, and let's put the cursor here for a minute. So cylinder 8. RZ90 SX, make it skinnier because it's going to fit inside that hole there. And this is going to be a target for the bones that go. There's going to be this actuator, this turnbuckle here is going to go between these two. So this is going to be a target for that. It's going to be parented, or it's going to be a child of the petal, so that it makes it look like the bone is actually, or that turnbuckle is actually controlling the arm. All right. Now these are actually going to be individual pieces that we parent over. So I'm going to apply scale and put my cursor back here. And these I'm just going to duplicate around R45. So it looks like they all made it okay. So let's parent this to this. If we go back to our timeline, then all those turnbuckles should move with their petals. So that's good. All right, so now we need to create the linkage that goes from here to here. And we're just going to make it a cylinder, mesh cylinder. And we're going to cheat a little bit because we're going to use a stretch to constraint. Just to make it a little easier. So let me put cursor there. Set orientation, origin to 3D cursor. I don't need the face on this anymore. And I'm going to put my cursor right in the middle of that, and then I can snap this in there by saying selection to cursor. That's going to put this piece right in the middle of that. And I'm going to scale it, but not on the y-axis, not on the x-axis. Nope. I'll just Alt-S it, make it a little skinnier. All right, there we go. And I want to rotate it down kind of in view mode here. See how it looks from the top. I'm just hitting Alt-S to make it a little thinner. Just drag that in there so it disappears. Delete the face. Put a seam on it. And then Control A to set the scale. Shade smooth. So there's that piece there. So now we need to put a bone in here that tracks between these two. And that bone is going to need something to point at. Each one of these pieces here is going to need a target inside of these actuator arms. So let me start by putting my cursor in the middle there, and let's duplicate this turnbuckle. 3D mode, Shift D, R45. All right, so they're all around, and let's isolate this guy for a moment. And let's put the cursor right in the middle there of that joint, and then I'm going to add an empty, And let's make it smaller. Like that. And then we're just going to put this empties all the way around in the center of each of these arms. So I can just duplicate this guy, selection of cursor, duplicate it, and just go around the circle. And now we just need to parent all these empties to that. So let's select all the empties and then choose the armatures, or the whatever these things are, last, and then Control P and parent them to the objects. Now if I move those, they all move together. All right, so now we need to create some bones in here that connect, or that control this rod and react to the two ends of it here. So let's put the cursor, stop it, sorry, object mode, cursor selected, there we go. So we go into edit mode. I'm going to add Shift A to add a bone. I'm just going to drag this down here for a moment. And then I can select this empty, put my cursor there, so it's right in the middle of our joint, back into edit mode, and with the tip of this bone selected, Shift S, selection of cursor, and it's going to run the bone straight down the middle there. And let's call this bone A1.L, A for actuator. And let's go back, put our cursor back there again, so we can copy this bone around. I'm going to edit mode, got my cursor in the middle, 3D cursor mode on, Shift D, R45, Shift D, R45. So now our bones are all the way around. Now we just need to add some constraints to these bones. So let's start with this one, and we do this in pose mode. And make sure you're using the bone constraint and not the object constraint. So inside the bone constraint in pose mode, we want to make a child of, and we're going to make this bone stick to the end of this turnbuckle thing, so that if this moves, then that bone moves, and since everything's attached, that bone moves with the pedal. And then we want to add a stretch to constraint for this bone so that it stays attached up here. So let's add a stretch to, there we go. I'm going to stretch to this empty, and now when we run it, that bone, you can see how that bone sticks there. And then the last thing to do is to take this piece of geometry, shift select the armature, select the bone, Control P, and then you want to choose bone. And now when we run the animation, that all moves together like that. And then we just do that around the rest of the nozzle here. All right, looks like everything is moving as it should. All right, that's good. And I also took the opportunity when I was doing that to rename these bones with the .l suffix so that we can use the symmetry function later on to mirror the skeleton across, because we don't want to have to re-rig this whole thing. Now if we take this guy and we move it forward, you can see how these pistons, how the turnbuckles all stay attached to them. So we need to add this to the animation too, because these things move forward when these things go up and down. They move forward and backwards. So let's move them backwards since they're in the, move them forward about like that. And then let's add another bone right in the middle here. So I'm going to select our armature, I'm going to edit mode, and I'm going to say add a bone, and I'm going to, let's go to, I'm going to rotate it 90 like that, and let's call this bone rods.l, and this is going to control the movement of those rods. Let's go back to stick. And we want to parent these to this bone. Go into pose mode, Control P, parent the bone. And we want to go to Euler so we can lock those. So with the petals in the Afterburner position, we can go back to the beginning of our frame, and we want to add a keyframe here. Add a single keyframe. Go to the end of our animation, and now I want to move this back. So these are back there. Maybe not quite so far. Something like that. We can adjust it and see how that looks when we run the animation. So it looks like they're pulling them back now. All right, that's pretty good. Just double checking to make sure everything looks like it's moving okay. And we still have some details to put in around the hinges. Let me bring in another picture. You can see that there's a linkage that goes between these actuators. So let's go into object mode. And we're just going to make a simple version of this. So let's say we create a cylinder. Only 1/8. And it's just going to go stretch from one to the other. I'm going to hide my bones there. I'm going to put it right there. Cursor selected. So I can put my set origin to 3D cursor. And let's stretch it out. X. Bring it down here. Oops. And I want to move along the locals. Just going to move it there. Like that. GY, push it back, tuck it in. See how that looks. It applies scale but not rotation. Let's see what happens when we mirror it. Now I'm going to set the origin here. Set origin to 3D cursor. So now I can work on just one end and get it kind of fitted in here. Alt S, kind of scaled in a bit. 3. And bevel that a little bit. All right, I don't know that I'm going to do too much more than that with it. So let's, oh, is it straight? All right, do a quick UV unwrap on that and some bevels and seams. Let's isolate it, edit it, and I want a seam there, a bevel there, bevel there, bevel, bevel, mark a seam along the back. Take a quick unwrap. That looks like I need a seam up there. That's better. All right, apply the scale. Going to add a bevel. And let's put a subdivision on it. We just need one. And I might add just an edge loop or two just to keep it from stretching. See how that looks. All right, so let's apply the mirror. And with our cursor back in the center again, just going to duplicate this around. And we just need to parent that. Actually, these can all be one object. And I can just parent, I can just join it to this. So they function as a unit. And now if we run the timeline, they should all pull back together. There's a little bit of binding there. I don't like that. Maybe I'll fudge a little bit. And just kind of bend it out a little bit so it don't get that binding there. And cursor's still in the middle. And I just want, I want to do median. And then S. Didn't take it all the way around. Make sure I got them all. Something like that. And then we'll get rid of these edges here. Just give it another quick test. So they're clear. And everything opens and no binding. All right, that's good. Let's just do it a quick face orientation. Okay, none of our new parts are inverted, so that's cool. All right, next thing we need to do is there's a hinge in here. Let me see if I can find a picture of that. So you can see there's a bracket in there that fits in there. And that should be pretty easy to make. We can do something similar to what we did when we made the fitting between the petals. So I'm going to isolate these for a moment. I'm going to take these faces here, duplicate them, P, separate the selection, and do the same thing on this one. Duplicate, P, separate. You can hide the petals now. You can join these together. Turn off our modifiers for a bit. And we want to merge by distance. Picked up these three in the middle. We don't need a seam or a bevel there. I probably don't need that either. So let's, I don't need these, I bet. Let's bring everything back. Hide that. And let's just add we don't need that. And we need a bevel there and a seam. And I probably don't need a face in the back here, so I don't have one. All right, so let's turn on the bevel and make that small, even smaller. And let's just take this face and let's just move it along the normals. Kind of straight up just so it sticks out a bit. And then we're going to move this just back so it tucks behind that wall. And that's all we really need for that piece. So let's put our cursor, make sure our cursor is centered. And let's grab this piece, edit mode. You know what, we should, before we duplicate it, check the UVs. That's okay. And 3D cursor mode, Shift D, R45. And do we get all the way around? Yes, we did. All right. All right, so that's another detail in there that we've got. I think there's only one more modeling detail to do. If you look in this picture, you can see there's an extra plate here. This would have been the right engine, and the fuselage of the plane would be right here. So this plate helps keep the afterburner flame away from the fuselage during ground operations, and it's also used to adjust the back pressure in the engine. So that would be this plate here. Actually, this is the left engine, so I actually want to put it on this side. So we're going to put a plate on this one. So I'm going to isolate this. I'm going to select all this, duplicate it, P for selection, and let's hide this, and we can clean this up. We don't need nearly this much detail here, so get rid of a lot of these guys. And we don't need many of these. Let's turn off our things, and we'll select a row and right click, Tools, Space, and we'll choose Parallel. That should work pretty well. Same thing here, Tools, Space. That gives us a nice grid. Let's bring back our petal. I'm going to just bring in the edges a little bit. And maybe bring this one back a little bit that way. Let's add a shrink wrap to it just to re-smooth it out, and we'll just shrink it back onto that petal and apply it. And then we'll extend this edge. So I hit G twice, C, bring it out, and a little further. Something like that. Going to add a solidify, go the other direction, maybe make it 3 millimeters. Even thickness, and apply that. And let's put our bevels, edges, and seams on here for UVs. In fact, I think I want to round the corners a little bit, because I think there's a little bit of a rounded corner there. So I'll Control B, pull back my mouse, just give it a little bit there, and let's put seams there. And back here, let's hide this guy. want these corners sharp. So I'm going to mark the seam, mark the bevel, and make sure our bevel is tight. Make it 2. I think that looks all right. Edit. You unwrap. You unwrap. That looks all right. Let's put that back up there. And then this plate just needs to be parented to this petal so they move together. And let's hide that. And let's go back to our timeline and see how that works. All right, that works. Cool. A little bit of cleanup maybe on the bones. We don't necessarily need to see all these bones. They kind of get in the way. So let's go down to armature. And we can, oops, somehow not in box select anymore. Box select. I'm just going to take all these bones here that aren't the root bone, and I'm just going to move them to another layer. And that just cleans stuff up. We no longer need these centers. We can get rid of them. We're done with them. And we're done with this guy. So now we're just left with our engine and its bones. All right, it's probably time to start thinking about mirroring these objects. So let me clean up a little bit here. I can join, stop it. Join there, and I have an empty that I always put in the middle of my scene that I use both as a handle for the whole object and as a mirroring object. So I just mirror things off of this object. So to mirror this, go in here, go to the mirror modifier, and then I would either select my object, my empty, or I could just pick it from the list. And I always start my name with a 0, 0 so I can find it. 0, 0, F1 empty. And there's that. So I'm just going to mirror all the non-moving parts first. Now I want to mirror the empties here. And there isn't a way to mirror them with a modifier. So what I typically do is I Shift D, right click to cancel the movement, and then just put a negative on it, and that'll move it over to the other side. So I'm just going to work my way around the engine here and do that. All right, so all my empties are mirrored over now. All right, you have 2 options at this point. If you want to be able to control the nozzles independently, there's one set of things you can do. If you want them to both react at the same time, then it's a little easier to do, because then you can just mirror these objects. So if I just mirror that pedal and I move it over to the other side, and you can see without any work at all, it still animates just fine. The problem is, like if you were texturing these things differently, this is really the same object. You could apply the mirror, and then you can texture them separately. That's fine, but you can see that the movement is kind of wonky there. So what I'd really recommend doing is moving them, going to edit mode, and then separating them. So it's a separate piece. And then, oops, I went to weight paint. And then all of these things over here, remember, they still have their parents from over here. So I would recommend selecting all these things, Alt-P, clearing parent, and keeping transformation, so that they're just completely independent. And if you notice before that these empties kind of wobbled when I did this, and that's because they were still being influenced by this stuff over here. So let me, I'm just going to go through, I'm going to mirror all these objects, and I'm going to split them like I did this one, so they're independent of the other side. Okay, at this point I have mirrored everything over and they're all separate objects, but there is still parenting that's left over from the mirroring. So I'm just going to select everything on this side and just make sure that everything's unparented. So Alt-P, keep transformations, and then hopefully when I move this, only the left engine moves. So that's good. Now we want to go into, let's go into pose mode and let's turn on that other layer. So we go to edit mode, and we named everything in the armature with a .L on it, so that was be identified as the left side. So I can select everything here. I'm in edit mode, and because my armature is centered on the origin, and because I have these .Ls here, and I've selected these, I can say right click, symmetrize, and it's going to move all these bones over. You can see it puts the .R suffix on this side. But now what we need to do is we need to redefine the constraints on these bones so that they point to the empties and the other piece. You can see some of the stuff is a little bit out of line, so it might take a little bit of tweaking to do that. But basically that's what I'm going to do exactly what I did setting this up. I'm just going to go around the engine, setting up the constraints and getting things lined up. All right, I'm back. I worked my way around the engine, and all of the bones now have the appropriate child of and stretch to constraints. All of the parenting has been updated so that all the empties are parented to what they're supposed to be parented to. And the final result is that one engine now is independent of the other. And that means we need to add keyframes to the bones on the right-hand side. So if we go into pose mode, and right now the engines are in the closed position, so we can keyframe, make sure you're at frame 1, keyframe at that. We're going to set to 0, initial keyframe there, and just work our way around the engine. And then we need to go to the end of the animation, frame 120, and then we need to rotate these 17 degrees, or negative 17 degrees in this case. So negative 17 is going to open it up. And then don't forget the rod here. It needs to move 17 millimeters. Oh, you know what? The keyframe the wrong thing. Let me go back to the beginning, keyframe this, and then clear this keyframe, and then go back here, and this should be 17 millimeters. Or 28, I'm sorry, negative 28 is what we used before. That pulls those back, and we'll keyframe that. Single keyframe. All right, so now if we look at our animation, both nozzles should open and close properly. Just double checking it from a couple different angles. All right, so it looks like there's a mistake down here. Take a look at that. Obviously that's stretching out too far, and it looks like this isn't parented to it. And it also looks like when I mirrored it, I did not actually separate, because these should be separate objects and not one. So I'm going to select that guy. Let me go back to beginning here. Select this guy. There we go. Edit mode. And just select the one, separate it. Let's see if I can fix this parenting. So this should be parented to the petal. And that works okay. And you guys have probably been looking at that mistake forever, yelling at your screens, telling me to fix it. And this side is obviously wrong, so this should be parented to that. And then this bone, see if we can parent it. Go to pose mode and then change the child of constraint to this guy. All right, so that fixed it. So that was just because I forgot to separate this when I mirrored things. So that's fixed. All right, sorry about that detour. Getting back to the animation here. What we have is nice in that the cans move, but they only move between frames 1 and 120. So to make this useful for an animation, we'd like to be able to animate them independently of each other, and we'd like to be able to have them open and close at any time during the animation. In order to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to create a tool, and we're going to use actions to actually be able to control these things independently of each other. So I'm going to start by selecting this ring here. I'm just going to select the outer edge, cursor is selected, just to put my cursor in the middle of the engine. I'm going to create a circle. I'm going to give it 24 vertices. I'm going to scale it down, GZ. It just needs to be near the engine somewhere. I'm going to edit mode, all. I'm going to select everything ES, and I'm just going to extrude it in so I have some faces there. Let's zoom in a bit. And I'm going to take the two top edges, top and bottom edge here, Control B, give myself a little bit of a bevel, go into individual origins, and I'm going to pick these two. I'm going to pick the ones that are on opposite sides of the center, hit S2 to scale up, hit SX to scale across. I'm going to get rid of this face and this face. Oops, just the faces. X face, and then go back, select these two, S0, because I'm still in individual origins. Make little arrows, M by distance, and now I've got a tool that I can use later on to control the nozzles. Let's do a couple other things. Let's call this one Afterburner left, and let's turn on its name so we can see what it is. And we don't want it ever to be rendered, so I'm just going to turn it off in rendering, and I'm going to duplicate it, right click to cancel my movement, go in here, and I'm going to move it, move it across the x-axis. I'm having trouble with my keypad there. There we go. And just rename this one Afterburner R. All right, so now we've got two widgets that we'll be able to use later on to control the actual motion of the petals. And we're going to control the motion by creating, by using actions. If we go up here, we're going to open up another window. I'm going to drag down my timeline. I still want to see it, but I want to go to the dope sheet. And then if you don't see action editor here, make sure you select the action editor, which is another animation window we can use. And if we select our armature, you'll notice that there's a name up here. This was created when we put the keyframes in for our various bones. It created this action for us, and it gave it a name by default. I'm going to rename it, call it Afterburner. We'll just call it Afterburner. And I'm going to put a fake user on it so that, let me back up. When Blender closes, if something is not used, like an action or texture or something, Blender will clean up things that are not used in the file. So we're going to actually delete this action from our rig. And if we close Blender right now, we would lose all of those keyframes. So by creating that fake user, we're guaranteeing that we don't lose that action if we were to save and close the file right now. So that action's still there. It's just not attached to our engines anymore. And if we run through the timeline, you can see that nothing happens anymore. We removed that. So what we need to do now is we're going to use these to then control each engine individually. So let's go back into pose mode, and what we do is we just assign the action to each of the bones we want to have controlled by this. So while we're in pose mode, make sure you go to the bone constraint property, not the object constraint, because there is an action option under object constraints, but that won't work for you. You want to use the bone constraint. Under bones, go action. We want to choose our widget, which is this guy. We want to, in this case, I'm going to use the Y rotation of it. If we go into, turn on our arrows, I'm going to Control A, rotation and scale these guys. You can see that the Y rotation is the same for both of these, right? It's going to be rotating on its Y axis. In fact, we can even lock these axes so that they only rotate on the Y. That's sometimes helpful. So let's go back to our pose. So we're back on our bone. We've attached this widget to it. We want to do Y rotation. We want to use the local space of this so that this is going to be parented to the airplane model as a whole, and as it flies through space, this is going to rotate around in different directions. We don't want the world orientation of this widget to affect this rotation. We only want its local rotation. So that's why we're setting local space. The range, we're going to go from 0 to 90 degrees. And the action is going to be our Afterburner action. And we want it to go from frame 1 to 120. And let's just do a couple of these. So I'm going to do an action. I'm going to choose our widget. We want Y rotation, 90 degrees, local space, and Afterburner, and frame 1 to 120. 120. There we go. Just make sure I did them. Okay, they're the same. So now if we go back here and we rotate this, you're going to see that nothing happens. And it's because, I don't know why this is true. It took me a while to figure it out, but this needs to be, if I parent this to something else, then this works. So I've told you that I mentioned in the past that I have an empty in my scene that's at the center of my scene, and all of the objects in my scene, all of the objects of this airplane are parented to this so that when I move this around, the whole airplane moves with it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of demonstrate something here. So right now if I rotate this, nothing happens. But if I then parent it to my main object here, and now I rotate, you can see that this now works. I don't know if you can see that, but I'm trying to get everything in screen here. So now when I rotate this widget, my petals actually work. I don't know why that's true. What I found was that if I was using, it was in here in pose mode, and I set it to world space, I didn't need to parent it. But once I set it to local space, I needed to parent this to something else, and then it worked. So now we need to either assign all of the constraints to each of these hinge lines or each of these bones manually going around, or if you have the copy add-on, if you go up here and you type in copy, if you have a copy attributes menu interface add-on checked, then you can select all these bones around here. It's certainly a faster way to do it. Select all the bones that haven't been assigned yet. Select the one that you have made all the assignments for, and then hit Control C, and you'll get this copy attributes menu, which only comes up if you have that add-on turned on. And then you can go down and click on copy bone constraints, and then that'll assign, it'll just copy everything over. So it's certainly a faster way to do it. This one you'll have to do manually because it's different than the others, but the other 7, make quick work of them. Now I can use these controllers to open and close the petals. So we can just rotate this around. In that 0 to 90 range, you can see how that opens and closes things. There we go. But an obvious problem here is that I'm able to manipulate this well past 0 and 90 degrees, which causes problems. So what we can do is we can add a constraint to this to keep it from exceeding those bounds. So with the widget selected, go to the constraints, the object constraints, go up here, and we want to limit rotation option. It's going to check all these guys, and we want to limit it on the Y rotation because we're looking at the local Y axis, which is this guy here. So we want to limit this from 0 to 90 degrees max. So now if I'm down here and I hit R, you can see I'm trying to rotate it past 90 degrees, and it's not letting me. Now if you look up here while I do this rotation, it looks like I'm going past 90. You can look at the widget, it stops, but those numbers keep going. If you want to prevent that from happening, check this affect transform. And now if I hit R and I keep trying to move it, it's not going to let this rotate past 90, and it's not going to let this value go past 90. So we can do that to both of these. So I can hit Control C, and then I can say copy constraints. And if we look here, it's going to have the same constraint, and that'll open and close that. Now the nice thing now is animating these is quite easy because we can turn them on, open and close them anytime we want, simply by putting keyframes on these widgets. So let's say I want to go back to the beginning here, and I'm going to hit I just to set these here, and maybe Shift D, bring it over here, go to 90, have them open up. Oops, sorry, bring my keyframe to there. 90, hit I, Shift D, forward. And now when I scrub through the timeline, you'll see that they open and close independently of each other, as needed. Certainly makes animating everything a lot easier when you have these controllers here. Just a little bit of cleanup now before finishing up with the project. We don't need to see all these bones. They really do get in the way, make things cluttered. So go into pose mode. I'm going to select, box select all the ones I don't want to see, which is basically everything except maybe this middle bone. And then if we come down here under the object data properties, I can assign this to another layer. I just hit the M on the keyboard, M, and that'll assign these to this second layer is what you're seeing there. And now when I turn that layer off, all that clutter goes away and we don't see them. Well, I think that about does it for this tutorial. If you made it all the way this far, thank you for watching. I know it was long. I hope it was helpful for you. If you have questions, please leave them down below. I'll try to get to you. Good luck with your projects, and thank you for watching.